good to be back. So trying to as we transition roles, I promise, or I hope to promise, that if I see you out there and you end up starting to fall asleep, I hope to promise that I'm not going to freak out and light you up like we light the cadets up. So before we get started today, I know Vicki and Emily have a few announcements that they'd like to share with you. Nope. Here.
I'm going to tell you all, you rocked the sugar and the rice.
Whoop.
It was awesome. We thank you all so much, and the cupboard loves it. Whoever said amen, one of those kids back there, awesome, thank you. But thank you all. That is just overwhelming, and we appreciate it. Bible school. Look around. As you can tell, we're on Mystery Island. And I just want to thank everybody that came out yesterday and helped. You all did a great job. It's amazing. And we can feel your prayers, so keep the prayers coming. We need them. After church, we're going to rearrange some things in here if anybody wants to stay and help. Starting Wednesday at 4:30, I have a list here. If anybody wants to come out and have dinner with us, and all the workers and helpers are welcome to come out and have dinner. So it starts at 4:30, but if you can't make it at 4:30, I know most of us work. That'd be a little bit later. But if you'd like a copy of the menu and the times, just see me after church.
Okay, as part of our Bible school, we're going to be doing a missions project. There's a board out front here, and it's with Children's Hunger Fund. So we have these little boxes. We're going to be collecting change throughout Bible school, and then this will go to Children's Hunger Fund, which helps feed children throughout the world. It's here in the United States. And then every night at Bible school, the kids are going to watch a little video about each one of these kids and the issues they face in their particular country. So we're going to hand these out this morning, so if families could just collect change. It has quarters, but we'll take any change you have, and we'll even take dollar bills. Thank you.
While they're passing those out, you can turn to what's page, and we've been here for a while, but it's page 15 in my Bible. But Genesis chapter 21 as we continue our journey through Genesis this morning. But before we get there, I was thinking about my time these past 32 days at Fort Knox, and you always wonder, wherever you are in life, you always wonder, like, okay, Lord, what do you have for me? And you have to be careful, right? Like, I have to be careful when I go down there because I'm not a chaplain. I have to be careful what I say and how I say it, because the religion for the United States, I would say, service, the departments is pluralism, because so many people are coming from different faiths. So as a chaplain, per se, like with an actual specific denominational endorsement, yes, you have the freedom to do your thing, but those of us that don't, or those of us that aren't a commissioned chaplain, you have to be careful how you say things. And so it's just interesting how the Lord works, because we're trying to, at some point, you take the hat off and you try to bridge that mentorship gap, because anyone can just yell, but if you're just yelling for yelling's sake, it doesn't really matter, right? So you try to bridge it, and the Lord kind of gave me, he's like, all right, you know what, we're going to do leadership principles from a book, a historical book, from a man who lived and was a great problem solver and was an awesome leader. So I didn't get all the way through the book, but I took my platoon through the book of Nehemiah. I was like, all right, leadership principles from this man. And I kept it very basic. I kept it very, secular, if you will, in the sense of these are just basic leadership principles. But what it did, and I was kind of surprised, but what it did is some of these cadets were like, yeah, we're going back and we're reading the book. So I'm like, oh, that's just kind of the Lord's telling me, like, I don't have to sit there. Like, they're reading the book. They're reading the Bible, and it's living and active. you know? And so there's just kind of, it's cool how the Lord works things in people's lives. You know, I know one cadet came up to me and was like, I heard you were, because they know we're reservists, you know, pretty quickly. I heard you were a pastor. I said, who said that? I want names, you know. Tell me right now, cadet, who said that? And so we're just like, yeah. He's like, can I talk to you? And I was like, sure, whatever. But when someone prefaces that, I'm like, oh, man, do I need to, like, go get a chaplain on standby, or because I'm not kind of here in that capacity. But afterwards, he just asked me, he's like, so how do you do the Army and be a Christian? I was like, oh, you asked me. Well, let me explain it to you, you know. And it was really kind of cool because I was like, all right, cadet, let me ask you this. Out of all the drill sergeants here, and if you've gone through basic training, you will understand what I'm talking about. Have you ever heard me curse you? No. Okay, let me ask you this question. Have I been able to get my point across to you? Yes. Okay. So you don't have to be worldly to be in the world, you know? So anyways, it was a good time. And I have a video for you. It's about a 30-second video after service. And hopefully you enjoy that. So Genesis chapter 21. Now, whether or not we make it through this whole chapter remains to be seen. But I've titled this morning, God's Faithfulness and Our Obedience. God's faithfulness and our obedience, because we're going to see here in Genesis chapter 1 that Abraham is kind of three different events, right? And the way I looked at this as I read through it and I'm studying it is that verses 1 through 7, we're going to see that it's essential that we remain obedient to Christ even when he shows himself faithful. Even in those times of victories, and we're going to see here, after 20 years of a promise, now, or 25 years, this promise gets fulfilled. And he still needs to remain in obedience to the Lord throughout that victory, if you will, throughout that promise being fulfilled. In verses 8 through 21, we're going to say, you know what? And this will actually, as we continue into chapter 22 in the next coming weeks, is that it's essential for you and I to remain obedient to the Lord even in the tough decisions, even in those times of life when the Lord is asking you to do something that you really don't want to do. And then 22 through 34, it's essential that we remain obedient in the daily grind of life. In the daily grind of life. So, verses 1 through 7 here. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said. Well, underline that if you underline things. As he had said. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. At the set time. You want to underline that as well. At the set time which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age. So before we hit this, backing up a little bit, we find that in these previous chapters we've been tracking his life. We've been tracking the life of Abraham. We've seen the call on his life, the faithfulness of the Lord, and the growth of his faith. And it's interesting with Abraham that we see highs and we see lows. And that's encouraging to me, because if the man who is called a friend of God has highs and lows in his life, well, maybe that's okay for me to have highs and lows, you know? It's going to happen. We're going to have highs. We're going to have lows in our life, in our faith life, in our faith journey. And I think that where we obtain the victory is you never see Abraham just forsaking it all. When he messes up, you never see him just saying, or when the Lord is not coming to prove himself faithful in Abraham's time, right, when Abraham thinks he should. We don't see him just throw in the towel and leave. Just say, I'm done with it. I give up. We see him continuing to rise. We see him continue, hey, I messed up. Now I'm going to continue on. Lord, forgive me. I'm going to continue on. But today we see the need for continued obedience. So we see our obedience is necessary in the Lord's faithfulness. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said. Sarah conceived at the set time which God had spoken. This promise took about 25 years, from the time that the Lord initially said, hey, Abraham, you all are going to have a son, and I'm going to bless you through this son. And it took 25 years. It's a long time to wait. It's a long time to wait. And this had been a rough road, as I said, with ups and downs. But you know what we find? We find that even in those ups and downs, God was faithful. He was faithful to his promise. I love that because God's faithfulness to his promise is not dependent on our circumstances. What he has spoken, he will accomplish. What he has spoken, he will accomplish. And Abraham and Sarah were mostly obedient during this time. And I love the fact that God's promises always come to pass in his timing. In his timing. Not our timing. Not when we think that they should come to pass. But they come to pass when he ordains them to come to pass. And you know what? He's never late. He's always on time. And he's always doing his thing. And it's perfect. But sometimes, right, we sit there and we get impatient. Like, oh, well, let me help you out, God. God does not need your help. God does not need my help when it comes to his promises. Henry Morris writes that we often become impatient waiting for God to work. But like Abraham, we should learn to be strong in the faith, giving glory to God and being fully persuaded that what he had promised, he is able to perform. And that just comes back to trust. That just comes back to trust. And as I think about these day-to-day tasks, generally speaking, with your kids, do your kids come up to you and be like, hey, just checking, you pay the light bill this month? Just checking, right? No, it's expected, right? They're probably not even thinking about it. The lights just turn on, right? That's why parents are always going through and turning light switches off, right? Or maybe dads are doing that. I think Jack Roush had them all taped down, and you weren't messing with that light switch. All right, electricity's not free. But the point is, the kids are never like, hey, did you pay that bill? Right? Did you pay the auto insurance this week? It's just expected. And I'm still, honestly, I think I'm still waiting in my life for me to have that attitude of complete and utter, just give it to the Lord and stop trying to be impatient for things. And the thing about it, though, is usually when we are waiting for the Lord, when we're in that time of waiting for the Lord to come through with something that he's promised us, you know what that time is? It's a time of training. It's a time of preparation. I was talking to this cadet that asked me how can I do this and that. And this subject came up, sometimes you look at the life of David, and we can debate this, but in my opinion, David was never closer to the Lord than when he was running for his life. When he was in the caves, when he was, going up against Goliath, when he was doing all these things, where he was in those valleys, he was close to the Lord. He was penning those, writing those psalms. And then we see him enter into the portion of his reign where he actually gets into the palace. And then we see him get complacent. And we see him do things that he shouldn't be doing. And we see his pride kind of come up. It's like in those time of waiting, Abraham had to go through things before the Lord was ready to bless them. David had to go through things before the Lord was ready to give him the kingship. And as you and I, we have to go through things before the Lord's like, all right, now you're ready. Now you're ready. But in this time when Isaac is born, we see that Abraham and Sarah were continuing to walk in their faith and obedience before the promise, right? This is just an observation, but for Sarah conceived. So before that time, before she became pregnant, before Isaac was born, they had to live out their faith life and unite physically together as a couple, despite their age. They had to walk in that. Sorry, my notes just kind of, there we are. But we see also that after Isaac is born, they continued to be obedient. Well, how do we know that? Well, he named the boy Isaac, which if you look in Genesis 17:18, the Lord says, you're going to name him Isaac. He circumcised the boy, which was a walking in obedience as to what the Lord had commanded him to do previously. So even in that moment of victory, even in that moment of that joyous moment of the Lord coming through with what He's asked you to do or what He's promised you to do, there's still a need to walk obediently before Him. Why? Because usually, in my experience, usually the enemy is right around the corner from a victory. Why? Because when we get into that victory, we end up finding ourselves a little bit more complacent, a little bit more, hey, we're joyfully celebrating this, and that's awesome, and they should have been celebrating this because it was a fulfillment of God's promise. But there's always the enemy there waiting. Okay, I'm going to get you when your guard is down a little bit. So it's important to walk through those times. It's important to walk obediently before the Lord in those times when He fulfills His promises to you, in those times of victory. But it's also important to be obedient before the Lord even when it hurts, even when it's difficult. And so we read here in verses 8 through 21, it says, So the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. Therefore she said to Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son. What's interesting there is just the language used. I mean, you could make the case that, Hagar was given to Abraham and Sarah when they were in Egypt. So you're looking at, 20-something years here where Hagar has been Sarah's servant. You can see the animosity here. She's saying, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac. And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. But God said to Abraham, Do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad, or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. Yet I will also make a nation for the son of this bondwoman, because he is your seed. So Abraham rose early in the morning. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water, putting it on her shoulder. He gave it and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water in the skin was used up. She placed the boy under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat down across from him at a distance of about a bow shot, for she said to herself, "Let me not see the death of the boy." So she sat opposite him and lifted her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, "What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and lifted the skins with water, filled the skin with water, and gave the lad a drink. So God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. This is a tough decision to make. You know, you're looking at Ishmael here, who's probably a teenager. Right? He's probably somewhere around 16 years old. The only son of Abraham. And one could assume then that they probably had a close bond. But once Isaac is born and weaned, they say around 3 years old, there's contention now between these families. And you see this teenager, he's seeing a shift in the family dynamics. There's tension there. Now all of a sudden this baby has all the attention. And what's his response? His response is to scoff. His response is to, make fun of. But the text here says to scoff. Now Abraham has a decision to make. Either turn his son away or contend with his wife. So one, though, as you look at this is a natural consequence of trying to do something on their own and not waiting for the Lord. And so what that leads me to believe is that, guess what? Despite what the world wants to tell you, despite what the world wants to tell us, is that our decisions have consequences for other people. But no one wants to talk about that. Everyone wants to talk about, hey, you go do your thing, you live your life, all this stuff. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't affect anyone else. It does affect other people. How you live your life does affect other people. You think of just the two examples here. What did David's relationship with Bathsheba, who did that affect? Well, it affected her husband because he was killed. It affected the baby because the baby died. And so on and so forth. You think of David's pride when he decided to number Israel. Well, who did that affect? Well, that affected 70,000 people when the Lord killed them. Because of that. Or the Lord sent that angel, that what it was. So our decisions, yes, this is a natural consequence of trying to step out of the will of God and do something and not waiting on Him. But it's a tough decision. And so what does he do? You can assume here through the text that, the Lord's going to speak to him, so he's probably crying out to God at this point. What do you want me to do? What do I do? And you know what? The Lord uses this tension as an opportunity to separate the child of promise from the one of the flesh. And Paul uses this relationship as an example between the flesh and the spirit, and law and grace. If you flip over to Galatians chapter 4 with me, if you go to Galatians chapter 4, starting in verse 21, Paul writes this. He says, "Tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, the one by a bondwoman and the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and he of the free woman through promise. Which things are symbolic? For these are the 2 covenants, the one from Mount Sinai, which gives birth to bondage, which is Hagar. For this, Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is and is in bondage with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, which is the mother of us all. For it is written, Rejoice, O barren. You who do not bear, break forth and shout. You who are not in labor, for the desolate has many more children than she who has a husband. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are children of promise. But as he who was born according to the flesh then persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, even so it is now. And he goes on there. But the Lord uses this as an opportunity to remove, make a distinction between the promise and the flesh. Tony Evans writes it this way. He says, when the legitimate heir, that is, Spirit and grace, comes, there is no longer need for the illegitimate. That is, the flesh and the law. In fact, listen to this. He says, in fact, the two cannot coexist. So the flesh must be removed if believers are to experience freedom and the enjoyment of the promise of God. And often, if you just look at churches around, if you just look at Christianity, often what we find are those who are bound by bondage, those who are legalistic, they often scoff and ridicule those who are walking in faith, those who are walking in freedom. And you look at just the Pharisees, they were bound by the law. And what were they doing? They were making fun of Jesus. They were making fun of the King of Kings, the one of freedom. But the underlying principle for you and I this morning is that our relationship with the flesh needs to be one of removal and not compromise. Our relationship with the flesh needs to be one of removal and not compromise. Remember, Jesus says there, hey, if your right hand causes you to sin, hack it off. For it's better for you to enter in to eternity, with as a cripple or as a whatever, than for you to go to hell as a whole person. Obviously paraphrasing there. But in Galatians 5:24, those who are in Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and its desires. But needless to say, this is a tough decision to make. This is a tough decision to make. And God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight. Do not let it be displeasing in your sight. And here's the thing about this, is that flesh and blood do not make the strongest bond God wants to honor. That's a tough thing to hear. There are circumstances where we can do nothing other than put away family for the glory of God. And listen, I'm not talking about just sending your kids away. I'm talking about the principle of that distinction. And you know people that when they become a Christian, that bond, that family bond has to be separated. We knew, Abby and I knew a friend, or had a friend in Lynchburg that, when she became a Christian, there was a very distinct relationship shift between her parents and her. And so who are you going to honor then at that point? Are you going to honor the Lord and that relationship, or are you going to honor that flesh and blood relationship? But still, not taking this away from the text, still a really tough decision. As the Lord is telling Abraham, hey, put away your son. Move him along. How could Abraham send his son away with only, essentially, this man was rich. Right? He could have sent him with probably 18 different camels loaded with stuff. What does he send him with? A water bottle and some bread. How could he do that? And I think he could do that because he knew the character of God. Because God was the one telling him, put them away, send them along, and he knew his God. He knew the nature and the character of his God. Because God had already promised to make Ishmael into a nation. And again, as you go through here, God again promises to make him into a nation. So when we are asked by the Lord to do something that seems harsh to us, we can rest assured that God knows what he's doing. God understands. And we can lean on and we can trust his character. in his nature. So he sends them away, and then the water's used up, and Hagar puts the boy down and says, I can't watch him die, and then goes and cries to the Lord. And at some point, Ishmael must have been praying and seeking the Lord too, because God responds, but he responds to Ishmael's cry and not Hagar's. But I think, though, that the Lord allowed them to come to their point of need. If Abraham had sent them away loaded with, camels loaded with stuff, they would have been dependent on that. But the Lord allows them to come to their point of need, as he does with us too. The Lord allows us to walk through things so that we know, okay, God, we need you. Henry Morris writes it this way. He said, God had allowed them to come to the point where they could no longer endure in their own strength and would have to depend on him. And that apparently was his purpose all along, that they, like Abraham, might learn to trust him. If you look at 2 Corinthians 1, 8 through 10, Paul writes this. He says, we think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability. Anyone ever feel like that? Has anyone here ever been crushed and overwhelmed beyond their ability to endure? So that right there kind of nixes that whole little philosophy of God's not going to give you more than you can handle. Paul's saying we thought we were going to die. He said we more than we can endure, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die. But as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God, who raises the dead. And he did rescue us from mortal danger, and he will rescue us again. We have placed our confidence in him, and he will continue to rescue us. God allowed them to go to their point of need. And he hears the cry. He hears the cry of the boy, and here's what I'm looking at this, and I'm just like, I'm wrestling with it because for all intents and purposes, Hagar didn't ask to sleep with Abraham. Right? Ishmael didn't ask to be born. And God hears the voice of those who are victims in this place. And he comes and he comforts them. And for us, if you're walking through something that you didn't ask for, the Lord hears you. The Lord hears you, and he knows what you're going through and what you have endured and what you've had to deal with. The Lord hears his people when they call to him for help. And Psalm 34 says, he rescues them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he rescues those whose spirits are crushed. Talking with some of the cadets, sitting there, and you get to know some of them, and so I was just interested, and I asked this one cadet. I was like, hey, it's actually kind of cool. Like, this one cadet, before we stepped off for land navigation, probably like a week and a half before we left yesterday, they're not allowed to have their phones with them. But we made an exception because it's like 5:30 in the morning, and we're getting ready to do some training, and he's got his phone with him, and he's on FaceTime with his wife as she's in labor. So anyways, his daughter was born that morning, I think like 5 pounds. And but so I was asking him, this cadet, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna be teaching on this passage. So write me up a commentary for it. Just go through, see what observations, right? If you want to. And so they got together and they wrote up some stuff. And he writes here, it's kind of charts along with us. He says, with Hagar, God just wanted her to believe and have faith. And he says, she was crying, she ran out. She thought that it was the end. She couldn't provide, so she cried to the Lord. And his response was for her to pick up her son and that God would make a way because of who his father is. I thought that was pretty cool. God will make a way because of who his father was. Well, who's his father? His father was Abraham. So for me and you today. God will make a way because of who your Father is. Well, who's your Father? God. Right? So the Lord gives Hagar and Ishmael what they need. The Lord met their physical need and gave them spiritual hope. He heard them. He talked to them. He says, I'm going to make you a great nation. And he opened their eyes, and there was a well of water. And so he met their physical needs and gave them spiritual hope. And I love the fact that Jesus does this in the Gospels when he heals people. We see the multiple times where the Lord would physically heal someone so he could bring it along to a spiritual aspect of things. He often met the physical need to touch the spiritual one. And this interesting thing here with Hagar and the water, as Spurgeon talks about it, he says the supply was close at hand. So that it was there for them. They didn't have to go searching for it. It's not like it was designed for you and I had to kind of make my way to go get it. It was there for them. It was close at hand, and there was no great exertion. No great exertion was needed to draw the water. Which leads us to Isaiah 55. Isaiah 55, 1 through 3, which says, Is anyone thirsty? Come and drink. Even if you have no money, come, take your choice of wine or milk. It is free. Why spend your money on food that does not give you strength? Why pay for food that does you no good? Listen to me, and all you will eat what is good, and you will enjoy the finest food. Come to me with your ears wide open. Listen, and you will find life. The ancient words. The ancient words. And we could go on, but I think that's just where we're going to stop today. Is Isaiah 55, 1 through 3. Is anyone thirsty? So as we close this morning, I know it's not been super, super long. But we'll pick this up next week or the weeks to come. And so this will be our altar call this morning. And you can look at this as salvation. Maybe you're here and you need to make it right with God. Or maybe you're just weary. And say, is anyone thirsty? Come and drink. Even if you have no money, come, take your choice of wine or milk. It is free. The Lord is telling you today, it is free. He's paid the price on Calvary. Why spend your money on food that does not give you strength? Why pay for food that does you no good? Listen to me. I'd encourage you, listen to the Lord today, and you will eat what is good. You will enjoy the finest food. Come to me with your ears wide open. Listen, and you will find life. So if the worship team wants to come up here. Abraham continued to be obedient while waiting for the fulfillment of the promise. Abraham was obedient when the promise was fulfilled. Abraham was obedient in the tough times when God asked him to do something that was a really tough decision. And as we get into it next week, we'll find that Abraham was obedient in the everyday routine of life, dealing with people. He understood who he served. And for us today, the question is, do you remain faithful and obedient in the times of great joy and victories that the Lord brings into your life? Do you remain obedient in the tough times when the Lord asks you to do something? Where's your obedience level, if you will? But I'm going to, as they prepare to sing, I'm just going to read through this verse one more time. Which one did you want to do? Yes, I will. Just capo that. I'm going to read through this one more time. Is anyone thirsty? Come and drink, even if you have no money. Come, take your choice of wine or milk. It is free. Why spend your money on food that does not give you strength? Why pay for food that does you no good? Listen to me, and you will eat what is good. You will enjoy the finest food. Come to me with your ears wide open. Listen, and you will find life.